As a kid growing up in America, I think I can remember maybe once or twice where I ever experienced anti-Semitism. First time was at Girl Scout camp where somebody asked me where my horns were, and I remember being very confused because I knew I had no horns. And my mom explained later what that was all about. Needless to say, I didn't go back to that particular Girl Scout camp ever again. But really, aside from somebody who I consider to be ignorant asking or saying some question, I never experienced it. I also grew up in a time when Israel was strong. It was a nuclear country. And the idea that it was existentially threatened by its neighbors was not something that was inherent to me. Startup Nation was the nation of Israel that I grew up knowing. Strong, independent, scientifically engineered and minded. A place where innovation was happening. Not a place that dealt with crazy threats. And if they did, they were Israel. They could handle it. That world is not exactly the world that is today. And that's a hard thing for all of us to adjust to. I still think that that world is the one that I wish was in existence, but that shoe of that comfort that I would say existed for a couple generations just doesn't fit on our feet anymore. Rather, we have to know words and how they're defined, because I don't know about you, but I went to a panel at Mercer where I heard the term genocide launched toward the Jewish community, apartheid, colonialization, and the term of Zionist being used in a negative light, which outside of some small fringes of society, I didn't really experience much before. I'll remind you that, of course, there's things that we all need to be aware of. Israel is a state like every other state in this world, but these words actually need to be defined. So what is genocide? As you know, Israel is facing that very question in The Hague right now, as we're being accused, the state of Israel, I should say, of committing it. But the definition, in case you're curious, is a crime where acts were committed with the intent to destroy in whole or in part a national, ethnic, racial, or religious group. Well, that's the challenging thing to hit. I could argue that what's unfolding in Gaza is horrible. That's an easy argument to make. Does it hit the bar of what genocide is? That's a more challenging part to make. Certainly there is no attempt by Israel to destroy in whole or in part the Palestinian people, and there never really has been. Apartheid, well, that's an easy definition. I did know that one as a child, but just in case you're curious, it's defined as any system or practice that separates people according to color, ethnicity, caste, etc. Well, not in Gaza or the West Bank, but approximately 25% of the citizens in the Jewish state are not Jewish. They are, in fact, Arab Israelis. And shocking is shocking, they're included in society. You can see Arab Israelis having positions of running one of the largest banks, sitting on the Supreme Court. One even sentenced a prime minister to jail. Shocking. Israel boasts of how diverse, inclusive, and tolerant of a society it is. And I'll remind you that a lot of the Jewish world came from Arab nations where they're not allowed to exist anymore. Nations like Yemen, where there are no Jews, or Syria, no Jews. I could go on, but I think you kind of get the point. Colonization, an act of political and economic domination involving the control of a country and its people by settlers from a foreign power. Well, Jews have always lived in the Holy Land. I've done archaeological digs in Taldan, and I can tell you for certain we've lived in there for thousands of years, dating back to the late Bronze Age. Definitely early Iron Age, when King David is said to have existed. There's actually a piece of a stone fragment that was discovered at Taldan. It wasn't me who discovered it, I wish it was, but it was an archaeological student that talked about Beit David, or the house of David, meaning that that's probably one of the only extra biblical pieces of evidence that there was most likely a King David who had some sort of a power there. So how can you actually colonize a land when we've simply returned to it? And Zionism asserts that the right of Jewish people to resettle in their ancient homeland. It's not necessarily part of a liberal or a conservative ideology. The ideology of Zionism, in fact, stems all the way back through the Middle Ages, when we kind of have enshrined in our liturgy Shana Haba Yerushalayim, next year in Jerusalem at the end of the Passover Haggadah, and we can see that there's always been this tight connection toward the land. In one of her recent books, Deborah Lipstadt, who was the U.S. ambassador addressing anti-Semitism, and a columnist in a separate book, Barry Weiss, each emphasized the diverse expression of what anti-Semitism is. But when reading both of those books, what becomes abundantly clear is that at its core, anti-Semitism is a conspiracy. Well, it's a conspiracy theory for sure. That Jews, as a malicious, intelligent force, small in number, cosmopolitan in alliance, with the ability to compel the will of the powerful and wreak havoc around the world. Wouldn't it be fun if we actually controlled the world? Maybe we could get along, or we would maybe just argue about Manischewitz or which wine is the best for the Shabbos table. Not sure, something might happen. Either way, I can promise you we're not controlling the world. Anti-Semitism is flexible. And the reason why we have to know all of those terms is because today they're being launched at the Jewish community at an alarming rate. Barry Weiss writes in her book that regarding anti-Semitism, it's an ever-morphing conspiracy theory in which Jews play the starring role in spreading evil around the world. In the eyes of the anti-Semite, she writes, the Jew is whatever the anti-Semite needs him to be, the symbol of whatever is giving civilization troubles and woes, its most sinister and threatening qualities. But just think about it. The anti-Semite could be in the eyes of the country club capitalists, could be that Jews are a bunch of commies inciting rebel-rousing activities. The anti-Semite for the leftist individual, though, Jews could oppress the common man by controlling the capital. I'm sure if we were to think creatively, the list could go on and we could figure out where each person, maybe you even know them, could plunk themselves. And yet what all of this has in common is that at its core, we need to still be able to define anti-Semitism. The IHRA definition, which stands for the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance, a consortium of 34 Western countries, unanimously adopted this specific definition because it is amorphous. It is challenging to define, and because it's so challenging to define, it's even harder to do something about. The definition is a certain perception of Jews which may be expressed as hatred toward Jews. Rhetorical and physical manifestations of anti-Semitism are directed toward Jewish or non-Jewish individuals and or their property, toward Jewish community institutions and religious facilities. Well, you know Jews, we don't always like to get along. You see 3 Jews, you know that there's at least 10 opinions, not all of them agreeing one with the other. And yet, when it comes to this definition, we collectively do get along. We collectively are wanting to fight anti-Semitism. Reform, conservative, Orthodox, Republican, Democrat, we are united around this definition. Because, while we could disagree on all sorts of things, it's imperative that we understand what this word means. We understand that when we're being accused of being genocidal, accused of engaging in apartheid, accused of being capitalist, communist, and you name it, it's crystal clear to everybody in the room what is going on. One of the great Jewish thinkers in the 20th century was Joseph Soloveitchik, an Orthodox Jew, Holocaust survivor, and he was giving a sermon in 1956 in honor of Israel's independence. He was really also grappling and struggling with an understanding of a theology in a world that crushed the Jewish world, in a world that was after the Holocaust, and that had experienced the reality of what that meant, the reality of being the victims of a genocide, and also the reality of having, for the first time since the time of the Maccabees, an independent Jewish state with its own government. Soloveitchik then highlighted two different ways of living life in this world. The first way he called Brit Goral, or the existence of fate, and the second, Brit Ya'ud, the existence of destiny. The existence of fate, he taught, is the view that you are the product of a long chain of causes and effects, an accident devoid of significance, direction, and purpose, complete at the mercy of the environmental forces whose vortex have simply been pushed in an unconsultant way upon you. Maybe it was by God or something else. You are an object, you are acted upon. You are simply a victim. In an apparent inability to eliminate anti-Semitism and the seemingly impossible of uprooting or inoculating against it, there's an alternate view he proposed. The existence of destiny, well, he pushed the existence of destiny, an active existence, he taught, where we both confront the environment that we've been cast into, where we are identifying ourselves as a unique being with the value of freedom and the capacity to actually make a difference. We don't necessarily choose to be born or choose to die, choose which families we're going to even be born into, choose whether we are in a specific economic class or not. But in between, we have of being born and of dying, we have free will. We have the ability to make a choice. We are the creator. We are an innovator in life. And in this view, it is up to us to define our identity. We have the ability and the responsibility to define anti-Semitism, and we have the ability to tackle it in an aggressive way. It is our obligation, with this understanding of the Brit Ya'ud, to call out anti-Semitism where it stands. So we need the definition, even for ourselves, even for young Jews who simply didn't even necessarily experience it, for whom experiencing it now feels like I'm wearing a shoe that my grandparents wore, that I'm not happy to wear, but I am part of a chain of existence which goes way, way, way back. And that existence includes suffering, and that existence includes joy. And being the receptor of that, I have a responsibility for my ancestors to continue to call out anti-Semitism and embrace living in a world that hopefully we can once again remember that we are all created in the image of God. Ken Yehi Ratzon, may this be God's will.